previously indicated by some of your remarks, if the good senator was paying attention to the comptroller's report that is issued on a monthly basis, he would see that personal income withholding is growing at more than 7%, through May at 7.8%. The last consensus revenue forecast in April, we observed at that time that it was still growing favorably at over 7%. The agreement was we would assume 4% in withholding growth for the upcoming biennium. As we begin to see the final numbers approaching year end, it became very clear that those forecasts were very conservative. And therefore, the revenue package that was voted out by the Finance Committee acknowledged that. Is it based on the April 30th consensus revenue? Yes, it is. It makes an adjustment above and beyond that. I think this raises a good opportunity for us to consider the timing of when we do consensus revenue forecasting. And this might be an opportunity for us to think about making the last forecast be effective in the month of May. I'm old enough to remember 2017. I know I look very young, but if you recall, in 2017, the bipartisan budget that the good senator often praises, and certainly did have some good outcomes, you will recall that it had well over $700 million of lapsed savings, or savings that had to be negotiated with unions, and hundreds of millions of dollars of other savings. Let me just give you a few examples. You will recall that in 2017 there were $205 million in unallocated lapse savings. Some of them were undefined, that OPM was tasked with going to find those savings. So this is an entirely budgeted, balanced budget. It does not do anything that is atypical from any prior budget. It includes bottom line savings that you will see if you go back and look through the history of budgets that were passed by the General Assembly. The $485 million that the senator indicates are fictitious savings. Again, this administration does not agree with. One, the statute allows for us to re-amortize the teacher's pension. Matter of fact, we are avoiding a major cliff because we're assuming an investment return that is much higher than is currently being experienced and higher than our state employee pension. That savings and that process to achieve that lower mortgage payment, if you will, is in process and underway and will be in place for July 1. The savings on the state employees reamortization, those conversations are ongoing and they're going very well. We have no concerns about achieving those savings either. And lastly, with respect to the healthcare savings, I've said this publicly on several occasions, I'm going to say it again. The savings in year one's $50 million. You just saw Comptroller Lembo. He put out a press release announcing an updated pharmacy contract. He's been describing the work that's being done on expanding our Smart Shopper program. These are initiatives, win-win initiatives that lower the cost to our state employees that are well underway. So this representation that the $400+ million in savings is not achievable is, again, the good senator's art at having press conferences to get attention and making ridiculous assertions. This budget is currently balanced. If we anticipate that there are going to be any challenges, the Secretary of OPM and the Governor have means by which to make other adjustments. But as of today, we represent that the budget is balanced and the savings are achievable. So at this point, I want to open it up for any questions. But again, the budget that is before you and that is before the Governor is very much similar to what you've seen in prior practice.
Regarding the consensus revenue, what about...
growth rate is going to continue?
Go ahead, Mark.
Every forecaster says we're headed for a recession either the end of this year or before the next national election.
Well, the last time we had an economic downturn, we had a negative 3.7% growth rate. If we're suggesting we should plan for a negative 3.7% growth rate, the question is, when is that economic downturn going to materialize? You look back a year ago, they were projecting that we'd see an economic downturn more recently. We're closer to where we're currently at. The bottom line is as follows. Our methodology for revenue forecasting is to evaluate the trend, and the trend supports that we are currently growing at north of 7%. As we complete our monthly forecast, if we begin to see that the economic conditions are deteriorating, then we will respond accordingly. Items such as the volatility cap and the fact that we have the largest rainy day fund in Connecticut's history puts us in a position to be able to weather a storm and to give us time to modify either our revenues or our expenses to meet our current projections. So, the forecast you have before you, certainly consistent and lower than, 7.8% is what we're seeing through May. The budget assumes approximately 5.5%. It's lower than what we're currently seeing. It has some conservatism. We're well positioned with our rainy day fund, and if we see economic conditions changing, then we will adjust accordingly. You had a question?
Regarding the consensus revenue, so there's no violation of the law that was passed 10 years ago
No, we do not
regarding.
believe there's a violation of the law. The law says that the budget will be based upon the consensus revenue forecasting. It is the 4%, and the revenue package that was voted out of finance made an additional adjustment. The basis of 4% is in there, but they did make a 1.5% additional adjustment.
And that was
There's
in
nothing
there,
precluding.
right?
That's correct.
That was in there, and it was just
that was correct, and the good senator had an opportunity to review this budget. I'm very surprised that he is just now learning that the budget that went through the General Assembly several weeks ago had an adjustment on personal income withholding.
2 questions. Number one, you're still maintaining that there's no union approval required for any savings in the budget,
That
correct?
is correct. Healthcare savings are all either win-win or they're provisions that are allowable in the CBAC 2017 agreement. The teachers is all statutorily. Actually, the Teachers Retirement Board had a special meeting to adopt what was passed in law, what is reflected in law. And the CSRS reamortization, again, it does not result in any new cost. If there was a new cost, we'd have to do so, but we don't anticipate that there would be any issue. If at the point that contract is executed, we feel that it is necessary or prudent to put that in front of the General Assembly, then we will do so at that time.
And as for the conservative estimates going back really a couple of years, realistically, in the private sector, right, when a company overblows its revenue estimate, right, and they're saying, oh yeah, we're going to be at 5 or 6%, ends up being 3 or 4%, the stock tanks. Here in Connecticut, we don't have that problem with the stock, but you'd have to go to rescissions, you'd have to figure out what else to do. Doesn't it make more sense to have a more conservative fiscal estimate at the outset as opposed to a more liberal one?
Well, I would represent that it is conservative. If through May you're seeing 7.8% and you're assuming almost 2 percentage points lower, if there was a package put in front of us that was assuming 7.5% or 8% greater than what we're currently experiencing, then I would more so be concerned about blowing the estimate. The bottom line is, at some point we will experience an economic downturn. Have we made the appropriate steps to be prepared for that? I think that we have, and to the credit of some of the products in the bipartisan budget, the estimates that have been prepared for 2020 are still conservative relative to current projections. And if we begin to see economic conditions change, then we will pivot accordingly.
Melissa, can I just clarify one of the things that Max asked you about and ask one other question? I don't mean to harp on this, but I want to make sure I get this clear. Everything we've heard from Dan Livingston is that the reamortization of the state employee pension, not that it's problematic or that they're opposed to it, just technically that would have to be ratified by CBAC. Again, not that would require a vote of rank and file workers, but that it has to still be ratified by the coalition's governing board.
That is correct.
Okay, well, if I heard you wrong, I thought you said that there was nothing that needed
No, that is not that is correct.
Then I heard you wrong.
Sure. And I might have stated the CBAC, the leadership board does have to approve the agreement.
Okay,
That's
I
correct.
wanted to clarify. Then going back to, because I'll grant you, I did hear Senator Fasano say that the budget violated that law. And the legislature can pass what it wants. The point, though, that I thought he was correct about is he is correct when he says it's always been interpreted when we say a budget is based on the consensus revenue. It's always been interpreted as we do follow the CR to the number absent a policy change. So if we raise an income tax rate, if we eliminate a credit, even if we add more positions at DRS to enhance enforcement, those are all policy changes that drive the numbers. This time down, we interpreted it differently. We said most of it is based upon the CR numbers, but not all of it. Are we moving down a slippery slope then of turning the CR from a directive into a guideline, and then we can take most of the numbers, but we can take others, and doesn't that open the door then for people to say, well, there are several parts of it I'm going to modify?
So I think, as I stated to you before, Keith, there's an opportunity for us to revisit the timing of when the the last final consensus revenue forecast is agreed upon. But at the end of the day, The governor felt that there was a concern with the cumulative consensus revenue plus the adjustment that was voted out of Revenue and Finance and approved by the General Assembly that put Connecticut in a position, an unfavorable position, then he would not approve this budget. And based on the current data and the current trends that are published monthly, we are continuing to see growth well north of 7.5%. We will monitor that through year end. If those conditions change, we will pivot accordingly. But the data currently supports the package that was voted out of the General Assembly and still includes conservatism.
But, you know, part of the problem in the past has been the income tax. When you look at the deficits that have been reported over the last couple of years, it's always been because the income tax, largely the income tax, has underperformed. We've got the BEA just came out and reported this morning that income grew at an annualized rate of 1.5% in the first quarter of 2019. Do you guys have any pause to, you know, based on our past experience, that, you know, maybe, you know, 5.5%, 5% is a little much?
So here's what I would tell you. OFA and OPM have solid teams that are analyzing these statistics certainly on a monthly basis and conduct rigorous analysis. Again, if we begin to see any indicators that the current trend is moving in a direction that would indicate that this is not achievable, then obviously we will begin to make changes to adjust revenues and expenditures to ensure that this budget remains in balance.
So basically you'll lower your assumptions and you'll cut back on spending.
If that's what's required, that's what we will do, and that's the authority that the General Assembly has provided to the executive branch.
Okay.
We'll wrap it up. Thank you guys.
That's a lot of money, too.